You're traveling through another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. From 1959 to 1964, The Twilight Zone wasn't just a television show. It was a weekly ambush, a half hour that could mess with your head, question your morals, and scare the hell out of you, all in black and white, all before the credits rolled. Today, 15 facts about The Twilight Zone. From the censors who accidentally made the show possible, to a theme song assembled by accident, to the man who invented ironic twists of fate and then lived one himself. Stick around for the bonus. It involves Rod Serling, a cigarette, and a theme park that brought a dead man back to life, almost perfectly. The Twilight Zone aired on CBS from 1959 to 1964. Created, hosted, and largely written by Rod Serling, a World War II paratrooper turned television writer who had spent years watching the industry sand the edges off everything he wanted to say. 156 episodes, 5 seasons, no regular cast, no standing sets, just stories about fear, prejudice, greed, and the particular human talent for deserving exactly what we get. 60 years later, the show is still running, still scaring teenagers in the dark, still relevant in ways that should probably worry us. Fact 1. The show exists because censors were too literal to follow a metaphor. Serling was already a major force in American television. Emmy wins, critical acclaim, hard-hitting dramas about racism and injustice. The sponsors hated it. He hit his breaking point when a teleplay inspired by the murder of Emmett Till was gutted beyond recognition. The victim wasn't black, the setting wasn't the South, the word lynching had been removed entirely. That's when Serling figured something out. If he set stories on distant planets, made the villain a robot, or turned prejudice into a supernatural curse, the censors stopped paying attention. As he put it, a Martian can say things that a Republican or a Democrat can't. Aliens and monsters became his camouflage. The people trying to shut him down accidentally made him more dangerous. Fact 2. The script CBS buried in a drawer, and it saved the show. In 1957, Serling wrote The Time Element. A man visits a psychiatrist because he keeps having the same nightmare. He's in Honolulu on December 6, 1941, the day before Pearl Harbor. Every night, the dream lasts longer. He becomes convinced he's traveling back in time and is going to die there. CBS executives hated it. Too bleak, too strange. They bought the script and stuffed it in a drawer. A year later, producer Burt Granett found it in CBS's dead pile. Desi Arnaz aired it on November 24, 1958. The CBS mailroom was buried in letters. Viewers said it haunted them. CBS called Serling. The Twilight Zone was born. One script, one drawer, an audience that refused to be underestimated. Fact 3. The narrator nobody wanted, including himself. Serling wanted a booming, voice-of-God narrator. He approached Orson Welles, who caused a nationwide panic with War of the Worlds. The problem? Welles wanted too much money. Other options fell through as the first season deadline approached. Serling reluctantly agreed to try it himself. He thought he looked stiff on camera. He thought his voice sounded too clipped. So he stepped in front of the camera and didn't act at all, just stood there, calm and detached, like a weary journalist who already knew how the story ended and felt a little sorry for you anyway. The cigarette wasn't a prop. That sandpaper rasp in his voice wasn't acting. That was the nicotine. The man who thought he didn't belong on camera became the face of the show. Fact 4. The theme song was assembled by accident from 2 unrelated music cues. For Season 1, Serling hired Bernard Herrmann, Alfred Hitchcock's composer, the man behind Psycho's screaming violins. Herrmann's theme was elegant and sophisticated. It didn't stick in your head. It definitely wasn't something you'd hum on a playground. For Season 2, producers turned to French composer Marius Constant, who hadn't written a Twilight Zone theme at all. He'd recorded short experimental cues for a music library. The producers grabbed 2 of them and stitched them together. 4 electric guitar notes, a nervous bongo beat, jagged and almost alien. That accidental mashup became one of the most recognizable sounds in television history. Constant lived in France and never watched the show while it aired. He only realized what he'd created years later when the royalty checks got significantly larger. Fact 5. Future legends earned their credibility by screaming at inanimate objects. Before Captain Kirk, William Shatner delivered one of the most parodied performances in TV history in Nightmare at 20,000 feet, trapped on a plane, completely losing his mind over a creature on the wing only he could see. In Nick of Time, he was psychologically destroyed by a fortune-telling napkin dispenser. Burt Reynolds parodied Marlon Brando's method acting in The Bard. Robert Redford played Death in Nothing in the Dark, calm, kind, radiant, and sold it effortlessly. Burgess Meredith appeared in 4 episodes, more than any other lead actor, and became Serling's go-to everyman. Thoughtful, fragile, usually crushed by the universe in the final 30 seconds. Fact 6. A typical episode went from idea to broadcast in 8 days. Most prestige dramas of the era took 10 to 12 days just to film a single episode. The Twilight Zone did everything: pre-production, filming, editing, scoring, narration, in 8 days total. Serling was writing nearly 2/3 of the episodes himself. Scripts often arrived just in time. Guest stars would show up the day of filming, and be handed dense philosophical monologues. No table reads, minimal rehearsal. Learn your lines in the makeup chair and hope for the best. By the time a network executive decided an ending was too dark, the episode was already shipping. The pace protected the show's vision. When it ended in 1964, Serling was 39 and looked decades older. Fact 7. The episode that predicted its star's near death. On the day it aired, The Purple Testament aired on February 12, 1960. William Reynolds plays a lieutenant who can see a strange glow on the faces of men about to die. Eventually, the glow appears on his own face in a mirror. On that same day, Reynolds and director Richard Bear boarded a small plane. It crashed. Both men survived. An episode about a man who sees his own death. Broadcast on the day its star nearly died. Reynolds never made much of it publicly and lived to be 90, but the timing was impossible to ignore. Serling built the show on exactly this kind of moment, the ones that blur the line between fiction and reality. Fact 8. Black and white hid everything the budget couldn't afford. The show jumped from the Revolutionary War to the year 3000, sometimes in back-to-back weeks. The neighborhood in The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street was filmed on Universal's Courthouse Square backlot, the same set that would later become Hill Valley in Back to the Future. Spacesuits were repurposed U.S. Navy pressure suits. Roman tunics came from MGM's biblical epic stock. High-contrast black and white hid everything. Scuffed sets, painted plywood, wooden boxes with Christmas lights glued on. Then CBS tried to save money by switching 6 episodes to videotape. The spell broke instantly. Everything was flat, bright, harsh. It looked like local access television. CBS quietly switched back to film and never tried it again. Censors who accidentally created the show by being too literal to follow a metaphor. A theme song assembled from 2 library cues by a composer who didn't know what he'd made. William Shatner psychologically destroyed by a napkin dispenser. We're not halfway through. Still coming. The only Twilight Zone episode connected to an Oscar, and Serling didn't write it. The financial decision that cost him hundreds of millions. And the bonus? A theme park, a dead man's voice, and the ghost of a cigarette Disney had to digitally erase. Fact 9. The title came from a real aviation warning. Among pilots, the Twilight Zone described a genuinely dangerous condition. During landings at dusk or in fog, pilots would lose the horizon completely. Sky and ground blurred into the same shade of gray. The inner ear lied. Pilots felt like they were climbing when they were actually diving. Serling knew this fear intimately. Before television, he was a World War II paratrooper. He understood something most horror writers miss. Fear doesn't live in total darkness. It lives in dim light, when you think you understand what you're seeing and you're wrong. By borrowing a term from aviation, Serling made the supernatural feel like just another branch of physics we hadn't figured out yet. Fact 10. The only Oscar-connected episode was the one Serling didn't write. In 1964, instead of producing an original episode, the Twilight Zone licensed a French short film, Robert Enrico's adaptation of Ambrose Bierce's An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. No actors to cast, no sets to build. All they had to do was add Serling's narration. When it aired, the difference was impossible to miss. No dialogue, no moral spelled out. Wind in trees. Footsteps, silence doing the heavy work. Then the ending hit. The entire escape had unfolded in the split second before the character's death. The film had already won the Academy Award for Best Live-Action Short Film. The only episode in the show's history connected to an Oscar was the one Serling didn't write. Fact 11. 3 writers produced almost 80% of the show, and it cost them. Serling formed an unofficial holy trinity with Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont. Together, they wrote nearly 80% of all 156 episodes. No network committee to water down the weird. By season 5, Serling was creatively depleted. He admitted repeating himself, sold his share back to CBS, convinced the show wouldn't last. Then the tragic subplot: Charles Beaumont fell ill with a mysterious brain disease that aged him prematurely. Friends ghost-wrote his final scripts so he could keep getting paid. The show's darkness had seeped into real life. Fact 12. Serling sold his stake for $600,000 and walked away from hundreds of millions. CBS offered Serling $600,000 for a 40% stake in the show. To a TV writer in 1964, that was never work again money. He figured the show would be dated by the 1970s. Black and white morality plays, nobody would care. Then every independent station in America needed content. The Twilight Zone became an eternal syndication superstar. Paranoia, greed, fear, those never go out of style. If he'd kept his stake, his estate would almost certainly have earned hundreds of millions in royalties over 6 decades. A classic Twilight Zone ending, except it happened to the man who invented them. Fact 13. The most expensive shot was borrowed from a B-movie. A typical episode cost $50,000. Then came the odyssey of Flight 33, a Boeing 707 punching through time, back to the age of dinosaurs. The production needed one shot, a stop-motion dinosaur. It wasn't made for the show. It was borrowed from a 1960 B-movie called Dinosaurus. Even so, that brief prehistoric moment cost $2,500, real money for a show running on fumes. But the show ultimately understood its own truth. Its most beloved episodes weren't the ambitious ones. The Midnight Sun, 1 apartment, 2 actresses, the end of the world. Time enough at last. Practically a one-man show. Ideas are what people remember 60 years later, not the dinosaur. Fact 14. The spiral at the end was psychological warfare. In season 4, Serling replaced the standard closing credits with a hypnotic spinning vortex. Black and white lines twisting into infinity. No beginning, no end. Just an endless loop pulling you deeper into the screen. The spiral didn't say the end. It whispered, the nightmare isn't over. It reset itself every time, inviting viewers back in. Because in Serling's world, stories never really finish. They echo. For kids watching in dark living rooms, CRT screens flickering, parents asleep down the hall. That spiral was a dare. Stare at the swirl, let it pull you in. And suddenly, your neighbor might not be human. The world outside might not be the world you left that morning. Fact 15. The plot hole hiding in plain sight for 11 seasons. On Cheers, Frasier had stated his father was dead. Wait, wrong show. The Twilight Zone's legacy isn't a plot hole. It's a permanence. Human fear, jealousy, greed, and folly never change. They just get recycled from one generation to the next. The monsters wear different faces. The technology updates, but the dread, that's eternal. That's why episodes first aired in 1960 still feel fresh today. Serling didn't build a place. He didn't create a secret dimension hidden behind a door. The Twilight Zone was never out there. It was in your head. It always had been. Somewhere right now, a teenager is discovering this show for the first time on a streaming service, on a dusty DVD, and they're about to watch Time Enough at Last or The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street and feel the same chill that audiences felt 60 years ago. Because the zone doesn't age. It doesn't expire. It just waits. And now the bonus I've been saving for last. Disney's Tower of Terror opens with Rod Serling on screen, introducing the story in that unmistakable voice, that unhurried cadence. Here's the thing. Some of it isn't him. Serling died in 1975. Disney needed narration that didn't exist, so they brought in voice actor Mark Silverman, outfitted him with a vintage microphone and period-appropriate recording equipment, complete with authentic hiss, and recorded new lines designed to blend seamlessly with Serling's 1961 footage. When Serling says, "Tonight's story on the Twilight Zone is somewhat unique," and the next line flows perfectly, you are hearing a digital sleight of hand assembled decades after the original recordings. Then there's the cigarette. In the original footage, Serling holds a Chesterfield, like it's part of his anatomy. Disney's no-smoking policy meant Imagineers had to digitally erase it from every frame. Watch the pre-show library sequence carefully. Serling's hand is frozen in a slightly awkward C-shape, forever clutching nothing. The ghost of a prop that defined him, removed frame by a corporation that understood his legacy well enough to preserve it and then edited out the part that didn't fit the brand. Disney didn't build a ride. They built a shrine to a man who spent his career arguing that the things we erase have a way of coming back. The cigarette is gone. The hand still reaches for it, and Serling's voice is still introducing stories he never wrote.